As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep.
Put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
Flava Flav and Jason Kelsey are dueling to be the top feminist icons of the Olympics. At the Olympics, Snoop Dogg is the hero of the American society. And with George Bannister, I'm Casey Ditzel, back again for episode 6 of the Fifth Liners podcast. George, welcome back. Glad to have you back on. What's been going on in your life out there on the Eastern Seaboard?
Oh, it's been a little crazy. It's so fun, so great to be back. Felt a little lost watching those previous episodes without me on there, but now glad to be back, man.
It's going to be a heated episode here, going away from where we've been since the start of the podcast here. And rather than covering NHL, we will get to NHL, and we'll be joined by a very notable NHL guest in the Ottawa Senators assistant coach, Ben Sexton. We'll talk about NHL news at the end of the show. So if that's why you come to join on, you're going to want to skip the first half. But George and I are going to be dueling it out here, and it's an uncomfortable topic right now as NCAA guys talking college hockey here for the first segment of the show before we bring on Ben Sexton. And a lot of big news going on around college sports in general in the NCAA, but specifically impacting college hockey, where the power conferences aren't as notable. There's fewer and far between on the power schools, and a lot of the new NIL transfer portal rulings have made big differences in who even can compete at the top level. So, George, let's get right into it. And it started right at the beginning of the summer, May 24th. The House versus NCAA case ruled to eliminate the NCAA's ability to restrict athletes from being paid NIL money by institutions. Power conference schools are preparing in the neighborhood of 20% of their media rights revenues to go towards their athletes. That for some schools could mean $20 million plus annually being paid per school to their athletes. Unfortunately, not every school obviously can afford $20 million to pay their athletes. So now that NIL has become such a big thing, it is a completely uneven ground. Originally, going back before COVID, before all the NIL deals became a thing, back when the college football video game couldn't put names on the back of the jerseys and all that, the compensation model of NIL or the pre-NIL era, rather, was completely equal. No schools could pay anybody. No athletes could make money, and players weren't supposed to make money. The whole point of going to college sports was to be an amateur. Now you introduce the NIL here and the abolition of the transfer portal restrictions. You don't have to sit out. We're going to get to that as well. But more importantly, players are allowed to get paid, and it's the Wild West right now. This case ruling completely really blows over small schools, and especially when we look to college hockey, it's less of a problem in football, where a lot of those big schools and we're used to seeing only the big schools at the top that are going to be paying this. But in hockey, when you get 16 schools in, really probably only 12 of those 16 can even afford that. What are we looking at, the meaning of that ruling back from in May?
It's a difficult thing, and that ruling that happened back in May, you really got to roll back quite a while. Well, I'm thinking back to Ed O'Bannon when EA Sports, of course, it seems to always come back to EA Sports, doesn't it? EA Sports with their college basketball had his name, his likeness, name, image, and likeness right on their cover, and it was a spectacular selling basketball game. Fast forward all the time he spent in court fighting for compensation for that. He went to UCLA. He got his scholarship money. He became, was a good college basketball player. That is what set the tone for all of this. And now you're looking at conferences like the SEC and the Big 12, part of the Power Five, that are going to be able to dole out that $20 million. But really, when you're looking at college hockey here, Casey, you know, you're not, there are no SEC teams in college hockey. There are no Big 12 teams in college hockey. The Big 10, their media rights don't bring in that amount of money. And I know they just went through the process of trying to get more money out of Fox Sports and everything else. And they kind of split a deal with ESPN as well, but they don't bring in that kind of money. Then you take a look at Hockey East, BU. They don't have a powerhouse football team, a powerhouse basketball team. Their bread and butter is hockey. BC, okay, they benefit from being in the ACC, excuse me, for football and for basketball. But then you look at some of the other schools like UConn. UConn brings in some pretty good money in the Big East for basketball, but that's where it ends. What's going to happen to their men's hockey program? Can they survive with not having that amount of money being trickled down to them? And that's not even talking about the smaller conferences. And I put that, let me say air quotes, smaller conferences like the ECAC, where you have schools like the Ivies that don't even offer scholarships. So they've fought tooth and nail in the courts regarding NIL money for their athletes, saying, no, our education is enough for these student athletes. We're paying them enough in education that they don't need anything else. What's going to happen to some of those hockey programs going down the line? We'll see.
And knowing from a couple coaches in the Ivy League, that's one that I'm very close with, being in the ECAC. They have that faith, especially those top schools. You look at like a Cornell, that the name on the front of the jersey is enough for now to get guys going. But again, yeah, you look back to Boston College, Boston University, think of the names they're pulling in on top of the performance and the money. Obviously, it's going to be tougher and tougher. And more importantly, with college hockey, especially the schools that are starting to be added, and that's not even talking about the club teams that at some point are going to get in there. You look at the sellout barns between Kentucky and Tennessee and SEC powerhouse schools. We've already seen Arizona State come onto the playing field in the brand new Mullet Arena. Who doesn't want to go play hockey in the desert where it's warm all the time? You got a big party school, pretty girls and all that stuff. And then now you're talking about Arizona, UCLA, big schools out west that are in similar demographics, super nice weather, beautiful schools, beautiful areas to live, that are going to be adding on programs potentially to be turning Division I next and have even more money to spend on those athletes.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit off the air. You forgetting North Carolina. They're down south. Sure, the weather isn't as nice 100% of the time like it is at those other schools that you mentioned, but they're in the process of building a phenomenal barn. If you haven't seen it, look it up. They're doing great stuff at the AHCA level, or ACHA level, excuse me. And it's like they're about to jump to Division I. So they're going to parlay that money that they're getting from the ACC for football and for basketball, and they're going to pump it into hockey as well. And they're already getting the private donations in order to build that barn on campus.
This is a quote from a CBS report, and more on the football basketball side, but again, still pertaining to college hockey. The quote is, "For decades, the NCAA fought on behalf of its member schools to preserve the amateurism model. While the House Treaty ensures the NCAA's survival as an organization, the NCAA will be extremely diminished in its entity on the hook for $1.1 billion of the settlement. This is a major loss for the NCAA." On the hockey side, we've already seen the NIL Alston gap that bridges those big schools, and a team like an Atlantic side, RIT, who in the past has competed for Frozen Fours. We see AIC Air Force have made it past the first round of the tournament. Now that becomes extremely more difficult, if not impossible, to have a small school that's going to struggle to fill scholarship spots against a team that can have 26 full ride guys on top of guys getting paid $50,000 in some cases.
It's that extra money, right? That's the killer. RIT's already lost some major players in their program jumping to a bigger school. Who knows what type of, backdoor negotiations were worked out. Well, come play for us. We'll give you an extra 20. we're looking at doing this and then we'll give you an extra 20. RIT is not going to be able to match that. There's no way they could match that. They're the RIT, if I'm not mistaken, hockey's their only Division I program. So where's that money going to come from? There's only so much love for hockey, and I know hockey fans are rabid, but are they going to really pump in that much money to kind of match that backdoor conversation that's happening at a bigger school? There's no way that's happening.
The two trigger words, NIL and Alston money, are the two ways that schools can provide extra cash to the players. Alston comes on an academic basis, so to be able to maintain the pay of whatever extra money the school is giving, you have to maintain a certain GPA that's provided by the school. I believe it's a 2.0, but it might depend on whatever the scholarship is. NIL money comes from a service, so that could be showing up in a commercial. That could be as simple as sending a video to George's daughter and George works for my school and says, "Oh, Casey's my favorite athlete." And I go out on my phone and say, "Hey, this is Casey from Clarkson University, and happy birthday to you." And then I get paid $10 million. And that's as simple as it can be, as under the table as some of these unwritten rules are. You look at the top schools, and in college hockey specifically, as we've said, it's a very small margin, and about 12 schools that are predominantly run by NIL and have the opportunity to do this, especially front loaded, with the exception of Quinnipiac. And even Quinnipiac has QR codes all over their rink trying to raise money for their NIL fund, not on the same level as the other 8 schools in the top, but it's Denver number 1, Boston College number 2, Boston University number 3. These are the national rankings, by the way, not the spending of NIL. But Michigan number 4, Michigan State number 5, Quinnipiac was in there at 6, Minnesota 7, North Dakota 8, and those are the national rankings at the end of the season from last year. Now look at the names some of these teams are pulling in: Zeev Buium, Massimo Rizzo, Jack Devine. That's Denver's top line. Boston College has Cutter Gauthier, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault, Will Smith. Next year, they're adding James Higgins, who's going to be just about as good as Macklin Celebrini and supposed to be next year's number 1 overall draft pick. Jacob Fowler, their top goalie. Boston University, Macklin Celebrini, Lane Hudson, Luke Tuck. And looking forward at some of the names they add next year: Cole Iserman, Camille Bednarik, Cole Hudson going there, and a longer list that's going to come down the road. All of those players you can guarantee are getting paid quite a bit on the side to be at those schools. And bridging the gap, and this is I'm not going to name the player or the school that they were committed to here. It is a player that was active this season and a team that made it to the Frozen Four. So that narrows your choices down to about 110 roster picks. But a player that was committed to a school in a different conference that does not offer the NIL money, this school offered him $25,000 on top of that to come over and, hey, we'll pay you cash on the spot in NIL money. Went back to the smaller school and asked if they could match the money. And obviously the small school can't do that. And all of a sudden, boom, I'm gone. That's a draft pick who just appeared in the Frozen Four this year. And George, there's absolutely no way that these small schools can compete.
And that's going to be the bigger problem for college hockey. There's already been a bit of a dichotomy of between the haves and the have-nots, and we're seeing a even bigger bridge being built between that. I mean, you take a look. You mentioned at Boston College, Gabe Perreault. Gabe Perreault, by the way, drafted by the New York Rangers. We'll tie it into pro hockey there. He's probably going to make more money next year at BC than he would have playing for the Hartford Wolfpack. And sure, he could have said, "I have unfinished business. I want to win a natty at BC." But you take a closer look at it, with him making more money as a student athlete at BC than he would have at Hartford, just the way the entry-level contracts are written out for players, it was a no-brainer for him to go back to school and make the more money and even develop and get a little more size. It's affecting a bit of the program as well, because nowadays is not automatic that your first round draft pick is going to go and develop in your system for a year, maybe two, before making the jump to the NHL. Now it's, all right, well, I don't like that minor league contract. I'm getting more money in college. I'll make more money in college, still play, still develop, still put up monster numbers. And then, if you still want me under your control for 3 years, then I'll come back to you.
And that's one where you look back to the old NBA rules before the one and done and all that came apart. You'd almost rather see it go back to that, where you have the option to go straight to the pros rather than being forced to go into a junior NCAA setup. I guess the NCAA is probably arguing against that because they at least get those players for 1 year to, show off in the NCAA. But it certainly favors the power schools, and it got worse last week. College hockey impacted even further. Part of the congressional ruling came out. This was released via Jimmy Connolly on Twitter. His tweet: "If you're a college hockey fan, pay attention to the latest from the NCAA. And as part of their settlement with Congress, the NCAA set guidelines for scholarship and roster numbers by sport." And he says, quote, "For men's Division I hockey, it is a disaster. The new guideline reading out that for starting in 2025-26, so it doesn't affect this upcoming year, but the following season, 26 scholarships is the limit for Division I's men's hockey. So that ups the number from previously 18 to now the option of 26 for schools. And that is a number that he says only 25 to 30% of schools in Division I hockey can even afford to do. And on top of that, it limits the men's roster spot to 26 max. And George, when I first read that, I thought that it meant every school was stuck at that 26 number. You have the option to go in, but the option of having 26 versus 18 full ride scholarships is completely, for those big schools, a no brainer when you have now 26 full ride scholarships plus a whole load of NIL that they're already spending to dole out full ride scholarships essentially. But now you're just going to be able to give more money.
Yeah. So for the small, and I think one of the most important distinctions to make here is that it's not mandatory. You could opt in for this. The murkiness becomes, I don't think you're a school, say like PC, right? I don't think you could say, okay, for men's basketball, we're going to up our scholarships to 15. For men and women hockey, we're going to up our scholarships to 26. But we're not going to do it for, say, field hockey, which jumps from 12 to 27. And we're not going to do it for softball, which jumps from 12 to 25. That's a whole part of it, right? I think you're either all in or you're nothing. So if you're nothing, you could still have 18 scholarships on your team, but have a roster of, say, 40 players that you could list on your website and then go with your best 20 that you think of the night, or 19, that you think of the night, right? However, if you give even one more than the 18, then your roster is capped at 26. So whether you're going to give 26 scholarships or not, you're either giving 18 or below to have unlimited number on your roster, or you're going 19 to 26 with a cap of 26. Now, you mentioned it's only 25 to 30% of the schools currently in Division I hockey can afford it. The bigger thing is, if you look at roster makeups, and we were talking about this off the air as well, Casey, if you look at the roster makeups, you have 3 goaltenders in there. All right, now that gets you down to 23 players. What's going to happen if you have 4 to 5 injuries, including one to your goalkeeper? What's going to happen then? Now you
have to dress 19. You have to dress 19 minimum.
Right. So, okay, so you have 26, you dress 19 minimum, but, one more player goes down. What happens to your season then? That's part of the thing where, I'm not sure that they look too much into that as far as injuries are concerned. I mean, it's totally different for football. I mean, 22 guys are your starters, right? If you look at, so you go too deep. So you got 44 starters, and the limit for football will increase to 105. It's not really going to impact them on a game day, right? Because you only travel with so much when you go on the road anyway. Same thing with hockey. If you have a roster of 40, you're not traveling with all 40 guys. You're traveling with a certain set, and maybe you're rotating in on a weekend series. But injuries happen. They're sports. Sometimes they're freak injuries. Sometimes it's just an injury. Hey, he took a shot off the hand. Now he's got a broken wrist or a broken finger. He can't really play through it because he can't hold the twig right. What's going to happen to these schools when they can't dress 19?
Well, going back to that point, the average college hockey team at one time has between 3 and 8 injuries at some point during the season. So if you're one of those teams with 8, you're immediately, say you got that 26 number, you're down to 18, and likely 3 of those are goalies. Now you have 15 skaters. You're playing 4 guys short for that game. And it's really interesting. Clarkson women's hockey's model to get recruits used to be that everybody plays, and they would have 19 to 20 on the roster. Going back to the year before COVID, they had 1 or 2 weeks where first week of the season, one of the stars goes down with a broken collarbone, out for the season. Week later, an ACL. Then you get a couple people banged up. All of a sudden, they had one game. Actually, it might have been the season during COVID when there was only a few. It was one game against Colgate. They dressed 13 skaters. Somehow ended up winning the game, but ever since then they've been up near, I think last year was 28 was their biggest roster size ever. But and that's an example of women's hockey where hitting's not even allowed. Now you go to the men's side and you're standardizing that, where in men's hockey you've got guys going full speed at each other twice a week, rivalry games. And when we talked to Josh Dunn in the last episode, he talked about how great college hockey is, but also how different from the pros it is because of the intensity you have to have, where it's only 30 games rather than 82. So each game matters so much more. And on top of that, the fact that it matters so much more means guys are trying that much harder. The injury risk goes up, and there is absolutely no leeway for injury when that's the case.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things. Again, it's a decision to be made by the administration, and we know for a fact that UMass has already, their athletic director has already said, we're all in. Right from the announcement, he said, we're all in. So that means hockey's going to go up to 26, football's going to go up to 108, men's basketball is going to go up to 15, and so on and so forth, right? They're going to hit that roster limit and stick to it. They're already all in. And that's a school in Hockey East. Basketball is going to be moving to the MAC. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But if you're taking a look at what is going to happen to the smaller programs, Mike McMahon, who's a great follow on Twitter, College Hockey Insider, he says, bigger programs will welcome the change. Smaller programs are terrified of what this might mean for them. No one really knows the final implications, and we probably won't for months, maybe even years. We don't know. The programs that might opt out altogether feels like they're on a path of becoming second-class citizens. Now, you mentioned a goalkeeper for a team in the Frozen Four who took some backdoor money, $25,000 straight cash, homie, to go to that school and be on the national stage. But turn around and think about what happened to that school that he was taken from.
Right. And more on that too, looking back at the numbers from last season, only 13 schools in Division I hockey out of, I think it's up to 63, 64 now, which is a number I should totally know out of the pairwise, but only 13 schools were at that 26 or less number. 12 of them were exactly at 26. Dartmouth, the only school under with 25 players. That's 13 of, we'll say, 64 schools. You're under 25% of the schools that have that number that they're trying to cut it down to. So if you say on average, every team has to cut 3 players from your roster, now there's 200 players that are getting screwed out of a roster spot. And that's not even with the option to hit the transfer portal and go somewhere else in Division I hockey. That's 200 players that are now going to have to completely leave college hockey, essentially.
either that or we're going to see an uptick in phenomenal Division II and Division III hockey programs that are going to be cropping up along.
But is that what you want to see? And sorry to cut you off, but it's
No,
outrageous.
no.
No one's going to a Division III hockey to go to go scout a professional game.
No, you're absolutely right. And perhaps that could change if this goes into effect and you find yourself with a majority of the powerhouse schools that are going to buy into this 26 scholarship and 26 player cap. I think you're going to have to change your attitude as a scout and say, okay, well, just like you just mentioned, Casey, about 200 players are going to be without a home or homeless unless they're going to go to a school that didn't opt into the 26 where they could find a roster spot there, or they go to Division II or Division III. I don't think that's going to happen though, because NIL doesn't come into play into the Division II and Division III, right? It's there, but it's not as prevalent as a Division I program. So maybe they could go to a smaller school, a smaller conference where a majority of the schools are not going to opt into the 26. Me personally, ECAC, NCHC, Atlantic Hockey, I don't think many, if any of those schools are going to opt into the 26. I just don't. Because if you take a look at all the athletic programs all around, there's not a lot of NIL money coming in anyway. So I don't think they're going to risk it. They're not going to say we're going to have 19 scout. Oh man, now we got to bump up to 26 for hockey. Now I could only carry 26 for hockey. So maybe you're going to see more ECAC, Atlantic Hockey, NCHC teams make these be a part of the 16 that go to the tournament, unless they're going to revamp the tournament rules and extend it out to 32, which I would love. Have higher seeds host like a mini pod before they go into regionals and then go into the Frozen Four and the Frozen Four finals. But those are the two options. Either you jump to a smaller school that didn't opt into the 26, or you go play Division II, Division III, and now you're having scouts forcing a scout. Could you imagine? And I'm just thinking of a Division III school in the area. Could you imagine a scout going to a place like the Worcester Ice Center in Worcester, Massachusetts, okay, to watch someone play hockey at Assumption or Worcester State just because they didn't have a home in Division I because of this nonsense that, teams are capped at 26?
Oh, it's crazy. And I think of a guy we're going to have on the show at some point this season that is a good friend of mine from growing up, Conlon Keenan, who's a future captain of the Toledo Walleye, 3-year captain of Division III Geneseo, and a couple of the Geneseo guys who were 4-peat national champions at Geneseo that made it to the ECHL, and a couple AHL guys. But with the exception of probably scraping 4 or 5 teams that are playing on the national championship stage at D3, it's nearly impossible that you see those guys make the jump to the professional level when you're competing against so many Division I colleges. And even further than that, and coming from talking about the ECAC, you're familiar with it with Atlantic Hockey, and there are quite a few schools. You think about a Clarkson, Union, St. Lawrence, RPI, like on the Atlantic side, Holy Cross, Sacred Heart, even though actually I think Sacred Heart's going to have a pretty good boom here in Atlantic Hockey with the new rink. But those smaller schools, maybe a Bentley, schools that don't have the crazy nice brand new rinks, schools that can't give out the full scholarship money or haven't yet, and unless they can find some NIL money, those schools could be, it's not a cheap sport to be a part of. And especially thinking about like a Union, St. Lawrence, Clarkson, schools that aren't D1 and everything else, schools that are predominantly D3. RIT is the same thing, even though they've been talking about trying to go D1 in every sport. At this point, schools that are D3 schools with that one D1 program, this could completely fold the Division I hockey programs. And I could see a couple of those schools that, have trouble getting full scholarship athletes to completely fold their program and just go down to a D3 level where it's going to cost you a lot less money. You don't have to travel on the national stage all the time. You don't have to, take an airplane to Arizona State to go play. You can take a bus regionally until you make it to a championship game.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. I'm thinking RPI, they're Division 3 and everything except for hockey. Bentley's Division 2, in the Northeast 10 and everything except for hockey. Holy Cross is Division 1. Their football program is Division 1 FCS, formerly Division 1 AA, which I still call it that. But all schools where there just isn't the wads of cash being, folded into to say, hey, we really want you here. I have an alumnus who's going to give you $20,000, and you're going to come play for us. That's not happening at a Bentley who has, a decent rink. Holy Cross has a rink on campus, but it's already outdated. The Hart Center, as much as I love it and its quirks, it's outdated, but, you can't compete, as you mentioned earlier in the broadcast, you can't compete to the likes of Arizona State with the Mullet Arena. Hey, play where the Arizona Coyotes played for a year before that whole debacle happened. And why not? Like you mentioned, the weather's great. The scenics are great. Everything is great about there. Why not go out there and play Division I hockey?
I want to get, you see a different level of it working at Providence, where you get the Hockey East and the top notch, and from an ECAC standpoint, it's predominantly those Ivy League schools where there's still a heck of a lot of talent, but not necessarily coming from the scholarship base. And before we move on here to the transfer portal, before we skip over the money part, and I kind of mentioned it with the amateurism, and it used to be about being an amateur athlete and being a college student. Now that it's become a professional setting, and when this became a talking point, when the NIL and all the complaints, and I completely understand the argument from a top level Alabama recruit that's going to be in the NFL someday, but if you're making that much of an impact that it's a problem that you should be making money, one, you should be in the pros in the first place. Two, you're probably going to be a pro, so you're going to make that money anyway. If you're going in, I played college sports and played with plenty of college athletes. Not saying that I was on that level remotely, but you're making a decision to go play college athletics, which is every year we signed a sheet that said, I'm an amateur. And if I win, I play golf. If I win a college tournament, or if I go play in a setting where I win a tournament in the summer, I can't collect any money because I'm a college athlete. And that's a thing of pride that you represent your school, but you make that decision. There are plenty of other ways you can get to the pros. You could go play in Sweden. You can go play in anywhere in Europe where they're going to, even in the college setting, they have the G League. They have European leagues that you look at, like the Ball family, that they sent their sons over there to go play. You don't have to go play college to be a professional athlete. And, it drives me nuts that college athletes need to get paid at this big level, even though it's great for the athletes, but it is terrible for the sport and for the small schools.
Yeah, gone are the days of the student athlete, right? Now it's athlete, sometimes student, part-time student, whatever. And that was, you mentioned basketball earlier, Casey, how they mandated you got to be in for 1 year. And then I think back, one of my favorite players before he retired, Carmelo Anthony, taking Syracuse to that long run as his freshman, and then was like, all right, bye, Jim Boeheim. I'm going to go get drafted. I'm out. I'm going to go play for the Nuggets next year. That I can understand. You mentioned football. There used to be a 3-year rule in football. You could never commit to the draft until you were a junior or completed your junior year in college. And then they got rid of that. And I think that was like the slow decline of it all, right? Like once the pro leagues say, okay, you don't have to do a year of college basketball to put your name in for the draft. What happens? That very same year that went into effect, Carmelo Anthony went out of Syracuse. LeBron James came out of that private high school in Ohio. I can't think of the name right now, right off the top of my head. Football, a couple years later, said, well, if basketball is going to do that, we're going to knock down the requirements for us as well. Now, of course, you still see a lot of players that stay in college because scouts will tell them, hey, develop this. If you're a wide receiver, develop your route running. If you're a running back, develop your vision. Then we'll get to you, right? So sometimes they stay a little longer. But you see a quarterback jumping after their sophomore year or wherever else. But to your point, Casey, hockey is completely different. You could play juniors in Canada. You could go and play ice overseas or Allsvensky or do anything else that you want, or in the Sweden League. Do whatever you want overseas and you'd still be eligible for the draft. You know, you don't necessarily have to go to college. So for this to have this much of a trickle down effect, for the money to come all the way down to college, to then see, you know, what does that do to a fan base too? Right? Like, how demoralizing is that for a fan base to have in the top of their mind, we're gunning after this goalkeeper. He's fantastic. Drafted in the 3rd round. Oh my goodness. There's another hint for you guys. Drafted in the 3rd round. Oh my goodness. We're good, man. Like, our decor's there. We got a 3rd round goalie. He's going to step in. He's going to be phenomenal. Only to see that kid turn around and play, you know, in the Natty. And you're like, oh, what is happening to this team? Like, okay, that comparison may not work 1-to-1, but it's like, all right, well, if my team's not going to compete, then what am I even doing, you know, being a fan of theirs?
Hand in hand with the NIL is the transfer portal, where we're going to go next. And completely gone is any sense of loyalty in college athletics, any sense of school pride, essentially. And, you know, from back to the standpoint of my days of college athletics and still being part of the college atmosphere on the broadcaster side, you know, it's even back to high school, the colors of whatever school that you represent is something that, you know, as a fan, as a athlete, the immense pride of that was something that, you know, I thought I would wear red, white, and blue, which was my high school colors, all the way through college. And obviously I changed that for green and gold at Clarkson. But, you know, I don't think I'll ever put away my Clarkson golf bag with the, you know, the green and gold jersey right behind me, and all the names that are on the wall behind me that are players that stood all 4 years at Clarkson. And fortunately for me, Clarkson has been a pretty, you know, a spot of community, and a lot of people feel that. But since the transfer portal, even that has been hit with, you know, guys trying to find new scenery, guys who don't get along with a coach, maybe guys who don't think they're getting enough playing time, where you go to a school that is prided on 4 years of development and freshmen aren't going to play. Well, now you get a freshman that, you know, doesn't get enough. I'm going to name a guy by name here that I was good friends with when he was at Clarkson, David Cilia, and a guy who is a phenomenal talent. He was a completely high-end junior player. He was a top prospect coming into Clarkson, but he's buried under Nico Sturm, whose name's on my wall, Josh Dunn, whose name is also on my wall, and Matthew Goslin, who was a captain at Clarkson this year as a freshman, where a year later he would have been a lineup, or maybe 2 years. He ended up transferring, which was a great decision for him. That goes to the change in the transfer portal rules, where previously you had to sit out a year. You look a year before that, where Adam Tisdale, a guy from Clarkson who went to the Atlantic Hockey, and you've probably called his name, played at Sacred Heart, and he had to sit out an entire year before he could go play for Sacred Heart. And that used to force a redshirt year, limited the amount of transfers. Well, with COVID, the announcement of the 5th years, they take away the forced redshirt year, mostly to allow those guys that have a 5th year of eligibility not to maybe take up an incoming freshman spot, go find a different spot and find a new new scenery for one more year. But what that really did was allows anybody who's not happy in their spot to now go, whim of the seat. And I don't like the coach, or I don't get enough playing time. I'm not going to develop here. I'm going to go somewhere else that wants me. And, it's a terrible thing in my opinion for, again, going back to small schools. It's a complete advantage to a powerhouse school that can now watch a guy go to an Atlantic school. Look at RIT this year, got completely decimated. They lost Tommy Scarfoni, who was a finalist for the Hobie and to be the goaltender of the year. They lose their top 3 offensive threats, all guys who would have been back next year, who would have been upperclassmen leaders next year on that team, a team that probably from the Atlantic would have been in the top 16 and could have had a chance to make a really deep run. They threatened BU in the in the tournament this year, and now they've lost everybody, and they might not even be competitive in the Atlantic next year.
It's mind-boggling to me of this whole transfer portal, and it used to be the year, as you mentioned, you got to sit out a year unless you have a very good reason, and we give you the exception. But that exception, I believe I read that exception pre-COVID was successful maybe 13% of the time. 13%. Or the exception to say, okay, you could step right in and play. Right now, it's just the wild, wild west. Like, you have a 5th year, okay, and you get schools like some schools in the ECAC, some schools in the Atlantic that don't offer grad programs. So you get these guys that come up, and you see some guys like who play for Bill Riga, who go through 4 years. He's developed them into this phenomenal player, and now he can't have them for a 5th year because Holy Cross doesn't have any graduate programs. So now you see someone who say, okay, I'm done here. I'm going to go somewhere else and play out my 5th year somewhere else. I mean, it works in reverse sometimes too. You take a look at a roster like Providence College. They just got a couple of players, one from Minnesota, one from UNH. I know for a fact Minnesota and UNH have graduate programs, so they're probably looking at something like, all right, I want to see what Nate Lehman can do with me. And of course, it doesn't hurt that you have Philip Svedback in goal, who's been their number 1 guy for the last couple of years. Okay, he's developed Berard into someone who's probably going to be an NHL caliber player. He should be already. That's another story for another day. He's doing phenomenal in Hartford. Same thing with Hemlash, also in Hartford. Let's see what he could do with me. Can he help elevate me and get me to that next step since I'm already drafted or not, sort of thing. So it's one of those, okay, my coach can't do what I need to do. In the example you gave, it's a little bit of a better example, right? Because if you see like a Nico Sturm or a Dunn in front of you, you're like, I'm cooked. I'm 4th line, 3rd line. There's no way I'm going to see top minutes on the ice. I know what I have. I need to get top minutes on the ice. That I understand. But for someone who's maybe, mid-6 forward, and it's just unhappy, like, I don't like this coach, and I'm going to see how much money this school's going to give me, right? It's just, and then, oh, okay, well, I'm going to this school. I'm entering the portal. Like, it's one of those things where not a lot of people talk about it. Like, there's, the NFL calls it a tampering period. Like, how many of these coaches are reaching out to these players or quote unquote representatives from the schools, right? Like, who's to say that there's not an alumnus or some sort of other person in play that's reaching out to these players and saying, I got $20,000 for you. You got a roster spot. You're going to play X amount of minutes on this team. Is that something is that something that they're looking into?
And I've talked to a couple of coaching staffs, and there's basically no rules. And that's the biggest problem about this is even the coaches don't know what they're allowed to do, where before there was, the transfer portal was minimal. And again, going back to the punishment of if you transferred, you had to redshirt. And a lot of that is because of those guys at schools that don't have the 5th year program that you talk about. When the COVID announcement came that, certain schools canceled their seasons and whatever, and everybody that was at an NCAA program that was affected by that year in 2020-21, every athlete was going to get an extra year of eligibility. Well, if you don't have an extra year to give, that's why they made the change of the rule. But now we're coming to the end of that. This is the final year that fifth year COVID players is a thing. We don't see any change in the policy coming up. You could have said this is going to be the rule for the next 4 years or it's for any player affected by the COVID. And again, that would go to the fifth year players. This year would have been the last that are allowed to use the portal the way it has, but that's not what the NCAA did. And again, even coaches don't really know the rules on that. And there is poaching going on. There's teams reaching out to players, and I was at the Women's World Championships down in Utica. And we were in the USA lounge with Haley Wynn's family. And, it was a super cool experience with a lot of top level players, and the USA is loaded with young talent and predominantly college players. You got like Hillary Knight and some of the iconic USA names, but it's a young wave going through USA hockey, especially on the women's side right now. Well, there was multiple college coaches there that are asking to talk to the families, and it's not illegal because they're not talking to the players, but hey, can I go, where is this person's mom? I'd like to talk to them. Well, this person is playing for Wisconsin, and this coach is not Wisconsin's coach, asking to, hey, my team gives out this apparel. We're sponsored by this company. We fly private jets to all these awesome places that we get to practice here. We get this many fans, and there's completely no rules. And I'm sure on the men's side, where money is a bigger factor, it's completely over the top on that, on the things going on behind the scenes. The change to the rule was from April 2021, and thinking about that year, that was that 2020-21 season where half the teams, the ECAC, for example, that where I announce it, you had 4 teams out of 12. That's 8 of the 12 teams weren't even allowed to play. And a lot of conferences were the same way. Well, that's why they gave that COVID year. That's why they changed the rule for a school like St. Lawrence that doesn't have grad programs, a school like RPI that doesn't have grad programs. Instead of having to limit the education, and going back to the student athlete point, instead of having to span out your last 3-4 years to make it, I'm a junior and I want to play a fifth year, instead of taking 8 credit hours to be a eligible student, instead of taking 15. Well, now you can take your 15 and do an extra year and get a grad program somewhere else if you need to. That's what the rule was made for. That's not what it's been used to. And, George, going on to the point of the poaching and the basically a free agency market that it's become, it's a widespread normality. Every single year when the season comes up, you don't know what your roster is going to look like next year. And even coaches have said it. It's essentially a professional free agency frenzy when it comes to the day the portal opens, and trying to sling out deals, get new transfers, fill this roster because this guy just decided he's leaving. He doesn't want to come back next year. What can a team do? And I don't even think there's an answer for it, really.
There isn't. And part of the reason was because the NCAA never found a way to limit it, to restrict it, and to regulate it. I mean, you take a look at a team, like we'll just bring this up as an example, the Colorado Buffaloes football team. When Deion Sanders came in to coach that team, he basically got rid of all the scholarship players. Like, he's like, you're not gonna play. So he went into the portal, and he was basically like, hey guys, come play for Colorado. And a whole bunch of players entered the portal. And he basically was like, I'm going to take you. I'm going to take you. I'm not going to take you. I'm going to take you. He built his team like an NFL GM would have, like drafting players and like basically saying, you, come on, you're on my team. And nobody batted an eyelash. Nobody said a word. And now it's starting to trickle down. There was a fantastic stat I read where softball players, and this spans more than just hockey, right? This is football, basketball, softball players. 237 softball players entered the portal. Only 41% signed on with a new school. What's going to happen to those other players? Are they really going to go back to the coach and be like, okay, I couldn't find anywhere else to play, so I guess I'm going to play here?
And in a lot of cases too, I know that the teams, the second you hit the portal, you're out of the locker room. You're not you're handing in your stuff. When you enter the portal, here's my equipment. Thank you for being a piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what's going to happen to you now? Now, if you were a scholarship player, and that's a big if, right? If you were a scholarship player, now the school has every right to say you're not playing softball. There goes your athletic scholarship. Hopefully you have an academic scholarship. If not, here's your bill. Here's what you owe us for schooling. And now what's going to happen to that? Can that student, no longer a student athlete, can that student afford that bill? Are they going to take out loans? Or are they going to pay privately? Or are they going to get out of that school completely and go to a different school? This is a kind of like all these things. And I get it. You know, at the end of the day, athletics, for better or worse, are a business, top to bottom, from pro, now even in college. They're a business, man. And if you take a look at some places down in the South, football, high school football is a business. Texas, Florida, Alabama, Georgia. You have whole towns that shut down on Friday at like 3:00 so they get ready to tailgate. There's a stadium in Texas that has a 13,000 seat high school football stadium that's sold out every Friday night. Meanwhile, Stonehill and Bryant, both Division I programs here in the Northeast, their football stadium holds 2,500 and they could barely sell it out. So you look at just think about that dichotomy and then elevate that status to like a Texas football, University of Texas football, University of Georgia football, University of Florida football. And that's where it all is, man. It's all about the money and everything else. And unfortunately, like we've been saying, gone are the days of, my high school was black and orange and I bled black and orange. And then I went to, my JUCO, I kind of lucked out. My JUCO and Division III baseball teams were both blue and gold. So then I bled blue and gold, man. And it's like, you don't have that anymore. It's just not there anymore. And it's unfortunate because, gone are the days where you're like, this is my team. And then you see, maybe if you're lucky enough, someone from your team get drafted. Now you're following that person throughout his pro career. Now it's like, who's on my team? I don't know who's on the team that I love. Like they're gone. This guy was here. Now this school is paying him $25K. Now he's gone. And I don't know what's going on. It's very unfortunate.
And further your argument there, you're talking about high school athletics and young college athletes. These are kids making these decisions. And back to the Ivy League argument about, they can survive on the name on the front of the jersey. And that's one of the coaches I talked to. It was, we're not too worried about it because we have the education where we can get when we go to a family and say you're getting Ivy League education, that's good enough to send their kid there. But it's a kid making that decision on, am I going to go play at Dartmouth or am I going to go play at Yale or Cornell or one of those schools where I have to pay however much money based on the financials of my family. If you're a wealthy family, which in hockey, a lot of people are, I might have to pay full tuition to go to Cornell to get this education, or I can go to Boston College. I can go to Boston University. I can go to Denver, North Dakota, and they're going to pay me $50,000. And again, one of the coaches that was telling me this, he goes, well, I really hope, and he goes, it's yet to be proven. I hope that kids are going to be smart enough to say, the student athlete argument is the student piece of that important enough that, hey, when I'm 50, I have a Cornell education, I have a Yale education, Brown, Dartmouth, whatever it is, or this school wants to pay me $15,000. And honestly, I think there's a lot of 17, 18-year-olds that 15,000 is a heck of a lot of money. I've never seen that much in my bank account as a college student and or a high school student for that matter. If I was scratching 800, it was a jackpot lottery. And someone's going to offer me $15,000 cash on top of a full ride. It completely changes the marketplace. So we'll end the discussion here and thinking about that. When actually, I'll add one more thing while I'm staring at it. We brought it up when Christian Humphreys was here about how cool it is about the names of guys that he's playing alongside that are drafted. But I'm going to read off for those listening on YouTube. I'm showing the USA National Development Team line chart, and tell me the one thing you notice here, the commitments of the players on this team. The top line reads Michigan, Boston College, Minnesota. Second line, BU, Michigan. Third line, Denver, Michigan State, Notre Dame. Fourth line, Michigan State, Boston College, Minnesota. The D pairs are North Dakota, Arizona State, BC, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Dakota, and the goaltenders are Notre Dame, Providence. And there is maybe 6 schools that I just read off, and 4 of them are pretty notably predominant on there.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. They're in the top 8 of NIL. Most of those schools. You mentioned Wisconsin, you mentioned PC. Those aren't in there. But everyone else, the Notre Dames, BUs, BCs, Minnesota, they're all up there.
So we'll end it on the question, again, we said we don't know if there's an answer, but George, if you're the NCAA, Congress has pretty much pinned you up against the wall. What can the NCAA do? More importantly, what should the NCAA do to address these issues?
Well, I think they have to be smart about this. I mean, you have Charlie Baker as the president of NCAA. He was a former governor of Massachusetts, right? As a governor, part of your job is to promulgate regulations or have your departments promulgate regulations and to draft statutes. I think there needs to be some sort of regulatory body or regulatory office within the NCAA to have a closer look at everything that's going on. And yeah, that costs money, but in order to keep it from continuing to be the Wild Wild West, I think that's the right way to go. You have to be smart about it to try to help keep everybody on the even playing field, because if not, sports like hockey, sports like, I don't know, water polo, softball, field hockey, all of those Olympic sports could go by the wayside if the NCAA doesn't act fast with regulating this.
We're going to pinch the college hockey talk for now. We'll be back in the fall here. We've only got one more summer episode before we hit September 1, and weekly episodes coming up soon. But as we get closer to college hockey season, we'll have a couple more guests that will further this conversation. For now, we'll end it here. Georgia, it remains to be seen here, but we're closing down as we're in August here. Now, next month, we'll have college hockey back in action, and more importantly than the struggles upcoming, the excitement for that coming. We'll be back with the NHL coming up. First, our interview with Ottawa Senators assistant coach Ben Sexton. This is the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. George and I will be back after the interview to talk about NHL news and updates. Our next guest has spent the last season behind the bench after a playing career in the professionals. Pleased to welcome Ben Sexton, the assistant coach of the Ottawa Senators. Ben, thanks for joining on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
A former Clarkson captain and assistant captain in the professionals. We'll start with your college time at Clarkson. You were named the assistant captain as a sophomore, which is a big feat in its own. You also spent 2 seasons as the captain what were some of the most important leadership experiences that you took away from being named leader so young? And then also, what were some of the core values that you adapted into your style while you were the team's captain there for 2 years?
For me, I learned a lot from guys that I played with over the years, whether it's in the junior ranks or even at my time at Clarkson. So I had great role models, picked up different pieces and different values from each guy. For me, any sort of leadership role, I really think you just have to be yourself. And if you're not, guys see through it. Fortunate enough to play with Mark Borbiewski for a couple of years. A guy that I learned a ton from, still one of my best friends to this day. Brandon DeFazio at Clarkson as well. Completely different leaders. Mark was more, he held guys to a high standard. Not that Brandon didn't, but Brandon, brought the group together away from the rink. For me, I think in any sort of leadership role, you have to set the standard and the old cliche that you have to lead by example. I think that's so important. I think you can hold your group and your peers to a standard. If you're willing to put in the work and they see that, you're not just, talking the talk, but you're walking the walk. And, I've been fortunate to be around a lot of great leaders, even in the professional ranks that have kind of translated to, my next career now in coaching. And, you pick up little pieces along the ways that kind of form who you are as a person and leader.
Your success translated right into the professionals. You were named the assistant captain in Providence for the 2014-15 season, and that was just your second year as a full professional. You also had 2 seasons as the assistant captain in Bellevue. How were you able to quickly adapt that leadership style from the NCAA into the professionals while you're learning how to play in the pros as well?
Yeah, I don't think anything really changes whether you're managing a team at a software company or you're playing in the professional ranks or the college ranks. At the end of the day, it's leadership. And like I said, I learned a lot from my mentors over the years, and I was just myself. And turning pro is probably a little bit later than the average guy coming from major junior or to Europe. I was probably a little bit more mature, than some of them. So, being a first year pro, but being a little bit older, kind of, I had some experiences that some guys didn't, and I was probably further along in the maturation process as a player and a person than some of those young guys. So, for me, nothing really changed. I was just myself, and I was very fortunate to be given that responsibility, young into my pro career.
In your 4th season pro, you made your NHL debut against the Carolina Hurricanes, being pulled up to the Ottawa Senators. Talk about the moment stepping onto the biggest stage as a player, and also being your hometown team where you're from, Ottawa, growing up in Ottawa, and then you put on the Sens jersey for the first time as a pro.
Yeah, obviously, it was really a dream come true. It sounds cliche, but as a young kid, you always dream of playing in the NHL. And for a kid that grew up in Ottawa, the Sens, I looked up to ever since I can remember. So for me to, play in the NHL for my hometown team, it's something I'm, very proud of, very grateful. There's a lot of sacrifice over the years with my parents lugging me and my brothers around rinks all over the country, and the sacrifice that they made for me and my brothers to play at a high level. Playing those NHL games was just kind of a icing on the cake for all the sacrifices that they made. And it wasn't an easy road. I stuck with it, made my NHL debut at a little bit later on in my career than most guys do, but I never gave up, and I was luckily and fortunate enough to be rewarded for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. From your time playing and even into your coaching now, what's one trait that a common fan might not see on a night-to-night basis from a player's perspective that makes a huge impact for the success of the team?
just the amount of sacrifice and work that goes in behind the scenes in order to have individual and team success. I think, you know, you talk to the average hockey fan, they think that guys just kind of show up in the rink, put on the skates, and God reached down and touched them with God-given talent. And there is a lot of guys that have that God-given talent, but the sacrifice, the time, the dedication to working at your craft, specifically at the NHL. You see how much these guys are dedicated to their craft and being the best. I don't think the average person really truly understands or appreciates.
At what point after your retirement did you decide that you wanted to stick with the game as a coach rather than player?
So I had some run-ins with some injuries. I had concussion issues started in junior and throughout my college career and into the pros. And I was unfortunately my career ended. I got concussed in Pittsburgh in training camp the year of the COVID ended up hitting. But I was actually very fortunate that when the doctors did shut me down, I was in Wilkes-Barre at the time, and Mike Vellucci was unbelievable for me. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. Obviously, anytime that a player's career comes to an end, it's obviously a tough time. It's nothing that you ever expect would come. And he was unbelievable for me. He understood what I was going through. He wanted to open his door and help me what was going to be next for me. And he afforded me the opportunity to kind of get my feet wet into the coaching and just to see if I liked it. And, like I said, he opened up, a door that I'm so grateful that he did, because I realized right away that I wanted to coach, and he allowed me to kind of, sink my teeth into different projects, different areas of the game while he was, kind of teaching me the way of the pro game from a coaching perspective. And, I'm very appreciative of that staff that year in Wilkes-Barre for allowing me to kind of see what I wanted to do next. And once I got into it, I was hooked. Everyone says it's the next best thing to playing, and it really is.
How much of your playing career translated into your coaching career? And do you have any specific examples of things that you noticed as a player that really helped you transition into that coaching position?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like it's all about relationships, and obviously you have to have a true understanding of the game. You have to have a grasp of X's and O's and tactics. But as a coach, it really is about building relationships, managing people, trying to just strive to maximize individual talents. And every individual now more so than ever is quite different. And I think as a coach, the faster that you can grow a relationship and tap into their potential. And the old saying, they don't care what you know until they know you care, is so true. No matter what level you're coaching, if these players see how much you care about them and your passion for helping them individually, I think it just makes your job that much easier as a coach.
You're not a very old guy. Talk about some of the difficulties maybe of transitioning to the coaching stage when there's guys you've played with. And was it easier than you thought, or was it a little bit difficult the first time you stepped behind that bench?
Yeah, like even to this day, like I coach some guys that are older than me. And, when I first started, I think it actually probably helped me having some older guys that I played with, whether they're my age or a little bit older, because they knew who I was as a person, and they know how much I cared about them as an individual when I was playing with them. So nothing really changed from that perspective with a player to coach relationship. And I think there was an underlying understanding and mutual respect that we both had jobs to do, whether it was me coaching or them playing. And, to this day, like like Claude Giroux is a perfect example. He's potentially going to be a Hall of Fame player in the National Hockey League. He's a couple of years older than me, but the respect that I have for him and the respect that he has for me, I think it goes a long way. I just think you have to be yourself. I don't think it matters how old you are or how much experience you have. If you care about them and you care about the success of the team, and you have, an understanding of the game and you're willing to do anything to get them and yourself better, I think it goes a long way.
Last year, you took over the bench as the Ottawa Senators assistant coach. Again, going back to being an Ottawa native, did that have more meaning than the first time you played as a player? And what were kind of the differences from your first coaching experiences adapting to being on the highest stage once again and now being a full-time coach in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean, it was completely different, experience for me as a kid. Like I said earlier, you just dream about growing up and playing the NHL, and then I was able to do it in my hometown team. I never thought I would ever be a coach, let alone in the National Hockey League, let alone with my hometown team. So obviously, it's a little bit of a surreal experience being behind the bench. I was very fortunate, pretty young into my coaching career. DJ Smith's a guy, that believed in me and gave me an opportunity. I'll forever be grateful for that. I learned so much from him and that staff that we had. And I'm looking forward to working with this new staff now. And for it being in my hometown, it's just, icing on the cake.
There's obviously a ton of different pieces involved in running an organization. You've got the general manager in the front office that have some objectives that sometimes might not be the same as the coaching staff. How do you balance some of the wants and needs of the front office in terms of player development and player movement with your team's with your staff's goal of just going out there and winning hockey games?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's kind of what we preach to our players is control you can control. And at the end of the day, managers, they're the boss. I think we're really lucky in Ottawa. We have a really collaborative group with management and the coaches, and we're constantly sharing ideas and sharing information and reflecting on different players through different situations. So for me, I don't know anything different because just being a young coach, just seeing the relationships that, upper management's built with our coaching staff on a day-to-day basis. I think there's a lot of unity there. So I wouldn't say that we're ever really on different pages. So I don't think you'd have to manage that. But at the end of the day, like managers manage and coaches coach, and you try to collaborate as best you can to ultimately achieve, the ultimate goal in the National Hockey Leagues, and that's winning Stanley Cups.
Management went out and got a goaltender now this year. A couple new faces joining the lineup as we look forward to the next season. This team that's been on the cusp of cracking into the playoffs for the last few years here. What are the expectations you have and some things that you expect to improve as we look forward to next season?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve and our management staff have done a great job bringing in some complementary pieces to our group to help with our young core. And, our young core is going to be another year older. We have some veteran guys that can come in and help our young group. As expectations, I think anyone in the National Hockey League would tell you that everyone expects to make the playoffs. Are we there yet? Time will tell. And I know our staff and our group, we don't really focus on that. We're kind of process driven and focus on getting better every day. And if we do that with, the players and the people that we have in that locker room, and if it gets us to the playoffs, and then, that's ultimately the goal. And you just have to get in to give yourself a chance. But I wouldn't say there's any expectations to make the playoffs, win Stanley Cups. That doesn't really matter to us. We're process oriented, and if we take care of things on a day-to-day basis, we should set ourselves up to ultimately, hopefully, to make the playoffs.
Looking forward to your coaching career coming up. What are some goals that you hope to attain behind the benches now as your NHL career progresses?
I mean, for me individually, nothing really changes. It's the same thing that we preach to our group about being process oriented. Like, just try to get better. Try to help players get better on a day-to-day basis, and continue to learn, continue to grow. Obviously, been very fortunate to, in my young coaching career, be around a lot of good coaches and mentors. With DJ and Travis and Jack Capuano and our staff coming this year. For me, I don't really look at the end goal. I just kind of take it day by day, try to get myself and the group around us better on a daily basis, and whatever happens in the future is going to happen.
You've said about the feeling of being a kid looking up to the NHL players and dreaming about that moment. Now being in that position where you've been around the league for a full year and plenty to come, what advice can you give kids who are looking up to you and guys who are in similar positions trying to pursue a future in hockey, whether that goes juniors, college, the route that you took, trying to reach the professionals, or maybe on a coaching administrative side?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's a couple things. You have to have a true passion for the game. It's just too hard to even get to a junior level or a college level, let alone a pro level, if you don't truly have an underlying love for the game. You're going to have to sacrifice a lot along the way. And I think I mentioned it kind of earlier, I don't think some people realize how hard it is and how hard you have to work to get there. So I think if you can combine, your hard work with your passion for the game, then your talents and, whatever your ceiling is as an individual, whether it's a player or manager or coach, you're ultimately going to achieve your ceiling when you combine, the sacrifice and the hard work together.
You mentioned the importance of hard work there. Can you talk to me a little bit, whether it's been from your playing career, your coaching career, some of the guys that you've noticed that, go into practice every day 110% and really don't take any sort of day off and really have earned what they've achieved so far?
Yeah, I mean, Mark Borowiecki comes to mind right away. Obviously, been around him a long time. He was a training partner of mine. Just our ability to push each other on a day-to-day basis, leave no stone unturned. I think about a guy that I played with in the minors with Teddy Bluger in Vancouver. He's a guy that truly woke up every day, was process oriented. He got better every day. He pushed the needle, and he's made himself obviously an everyday NHLer, and he's a Stanley Cup champion. And just seeing it from the other side now as a coach, and some of these guys that are so driven to be the best make your job so easy, and we have a lot of them in Ottawa, that continue to push the needle, on a daily basis to hopefully be the best that there is. And, some of those guys are stars in Ottawa. And, for me, one of the guys that sticks out is Jake Sanderson, just how he approaches every day, and just his sacrifice and willingness to put in the time, to put in the work, how dialed he is when he's on the ice, when he's away from the rink, is something that I really respect. And, that goes for the rest of our leaders that we have in Ottawa. And we have a good group, which makes it exciting. It makes my job a lot easier and more enjoyable.
You mentioned how you really like the lead by example style of play. Brady Tkachuk, who's your captain, sets that example quite a bit. And the Tkachuk family has kind of taken the hockey world by storm. With the veteran group that you guys have and the leaders in that room, talk a little bit about what it's like working with those stars from a coaching standpoint as you get to go do that every day.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to be able to do it every day. Obviously, Brady's a captain. He's an unbelievable human being. I think he was raised, by his mom and dad the right way. You can see the way that he interacts with people away from the rink. And I've heard nothing but great things about his brother. as well. And Brady's a unicorn in this game, and we're so lucky to have him in Ottawa, leading our team hopefully to the promised land. And he's another guy that puts in the work every single day, and he cares so much, and he has so much raw emotion and passion for the game that obviously us as a coaching staff really value, and I know his teammates do as well.
Coach, we can't thank you enough for taking the time here and making the schedule work around my travel as I'm sitting in an airport here, and Matt's in the office working from out in Boston. But we really appreciate the time and coming to sit down with our show here. Greatly thanked, and we look forward to seeing the success coming up in Ottawa and hopefully a playoff berth coming very soon. It's extremely well deserved for you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for having me, guys.
And a big thank you to Coach Sexton for coming on and spending some time with us, and looking forward to his young career progressing his second season with the Ottawa Senators upcoming. On to NHL news and back to where the podcast has been in familiar territory, a little less hot water here. And we'll start on a very exciting note, especially for the U.S. and right on topic, George, with the Olympics that are currently going on. As it was announced, the 2032 Winter Olympics are returning to the new home of the NHL in Salt Lake. And for the Utah Hockey Club, a very exciting time to be a hockey fan, as hockey will be one of the predominant sports there. But further than that, how important is the opportunity, do you think, of the Olympics coming to the Utah Hockey Club and maybe the community of Utah around that?
I think it's something where the community of Utah really showed itself during the 2002 Winter Olympics. When they built Peaks Ice Arena, they had to install temporary seating to extend the capacity to 8,400 for hockey, and they sold that out every night. The Delta Center, I don't think it was called the Delta Center at the time, but the current Delta Center was used for figure skating and short track speed skating. But now that the Utah Hockey Club has been established, this is a great time for them to take federal funds and international funds to help upgrade the Delta Center, which desperately needs it for hockey. Everybody has said it. Some people say, man, there's some wonky seating going on. The locker rooms have to be updated. Of course, the Utah Jazz or the NBA, they have all their stuff specced out nice and beautiful. This is an opportunity now for the Utah Hockey Club to not dip into its own pockets, to not reach out to Salt Lake City or the state of Utah and say, hey, we need money to upgrade. They're going to be able to get it done with Olympic money. Now, will the IOC now flip the venues and put hockey at the Delta Center and move everything else to the Peaks Ice Arena, which is still in operation in Provo, Utah? That's yet to be seen. I think that would be the smart thing to do. Have that money filter in, upgrade the Delta Center, make it the premier piece for hockey for the 2032 Olympics.
I'm already counting down the days to go to the gold medal matches for that. That's going to be extremely exciting. And hopefully by the time this podcast blows up, we'll be doing some live shows there, maybe in some sold out stadium. That would be a long ways down the line here, but we can fantasize about that. In NHL news, Minnesota Wild on the move. And last week, July 29th, Brock Faber signing a big deal, 8 years, $8.5 million, which puts him in the top 10 highest paid active NHL defenseman. And he's only played 1 year in the NHL. He was second in the Calder Cup voting this year to generational talent Connor Bedard. Tough to vote against Bedard. Faber played the entire season. There were a lot of arguments made that he could have been the winner, but he's the runner-up. He led all rookies in time on ice. He was 6th overall in the NHL in time on ice. And on top of that, it came out this week that he was playing through fractured ribs for 2 months, the final 2 months of the season. And, George, it's an impressive contract if you're the player. And for Faber, it's a guy I've been rooting for, as I had him on my fantasy team this year. But a local Minnesota guy He grew up in Maple Grove, went to the University of Minnesota playing for the Gophers. Now he plays for the Minnesota Wild, and he's inked for the next 8 years. Obviously, that's awesome. $8.5 million for a guy who's played 1 year, and he's right up there with Cal McCarr, who's making close to $9 million. That's an unbelievable contract, but for Minnesota, I think he's already proved plenty with the time on ice stats and being able to run the power play that he well deserves it.
Yeah, he's done a great job, he did a great job quarterbacking that power play last year. And it's one of those things where it wasn't really a surprise. Like you mentioned, he's a local kid. Everybody knew he was the best D in college hockey when he was at the U, right? I don't think anybody really had an argument against him while he was at the U and the University of Minnesota, obviously. But what a great keep for Minnesota, right? Don't even bother around. Yes, he was in his ELC, but who cares? Give it to him, right? Because now you have Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek and Foligno and Spurgeon, Middleton. All of those are long-term signings. You have all those players there. He's going to add so much more there, right? He's going to be an anchor on that D line. He's going to be quarterback in that PP1. It's going to be really exciting. And once all that dead cap space money clears for Minnesota, what else would they be able to add to the mix to elevate that team even more?
A team we haven't talked much about here, and for the reason you just mentioned, the dead cap, this season, and it was the same last season, will have $15.2 million of dead cap that is being used on a couple of buyouts on Parise and Suter that this year they couldn't use. They were pretty much out of contention. Unfortunately for Dean Evison, that was his job, and we'll get to him next. But for the Minnesota Wild now, you have, as you mentioned, Kaprizov is on a deal for 2 more years. He's at $9 million. The cap's going up. They can easily extend him probably for 8 more years. He's a young guy, and pay him out at $11 million. It's not going to impact them too much. Faber now for 8 more years. They have Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Foligno, Spurgeon, Middleton, and Brodin. All of those guys through at least 2028. 1 more year of cap hell for the Minnesota Wild, and then they're free to go. Imagine $15.2 million is 2 $7-8 million free agents next year, or anything really they could fantasize about doing with that money. How quickly are we going to see the Wild? Maybe not this year. I would be surprised if they're a playoff team, but I would see immediately the next year. Do you see them being a prime contender in the West?
I certainly do. As you mentioned, if they have 2 pieces that need to fill, it's very easy to go 7.5, 8 on those 2 pieces to fill, bring them in. And it's one of those things where kind of the reverse of what we talked about the first half of the podcast, right? With all the money, putting a hindrance on college hockey. This is one of the things where you put that money out there. You say 7.5, but look at our core. Come in and add to this core and contribute right away, and we're going to be dangerous. And that's one of the things, that's so great about being there, because you talk about a place where people want to go to play hockey, kind of like the birthplace of American hockey, right? Where you're talking about a venue that sells out during high school hockey championships, the XL Center, which hosts 19,000 people, right? To have those people behind your back while you're playing with that core, man, who wouldn't want to go there?
And I think we might have just answered the biggest question posed on this podcast. How about an NCAA salary cap? Are you kidding me?
Ooh.
Pool the NIL money, NCAA salary cap. We'll have to run that one up the chain. I'll start on Twitter and add all the commissioners around. We'll see if that goes anywhere. Columbus and the former Minnesota Wild coach, Dean Evison, have agreed to terms. Dean Evison now hired as the newest coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Evison fired from Minnesota in November after 5 seasons as the head coach. How about this one? His overall record with Minnesota that got him fired, 144, 77, 27 as the head coach of the Minnesota Wild for 5 seasons. One of those 5 seasons was the season he was promoted halfway through. One of those seasons was the season he made it to November. 4 playoff appearances. He made 4 playoff appearances, had $15 million of dead cap last season, and after 2 months, they moved on from him. He now goes on to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and what a hiring for Columbus when you think of a team that's in the dumps right now and for a few years has been in the middle of a rebuild, and now you have all of the names of the first round top 5 draft picks that are coming through that system that he's going to be able to develop. And the Blue Jackets with Evason, here they come, maybe.
Well, here's the thing, maybe, right? But here's the thing, he's proven he could develop the young players into top level NHL players. That's why he went to the playoffs 4 years with Minnesota. The question will become, who's going to be between the pipes? That's the bigger question. You could have all sorts of talent in front of the goalie that you want. If you don't have a good backstop, you're in trouble. I think that would be their only question. Can they get consistent goaltending or better goaltending than they have in the past? Because if they can, Evason certainly will turn that team around.
Lincoln's wants out. That's a big problem. And a high contract guy, they probably have to eat some of that cap. But, they probably got a couple years before they're really contending. So that might be worth trading and some retention on that. But for Columbus, it's bright futures ahead, maybe in the near term. Edmonton, another big mover on the hiring front, as they hire former Chicago Blackhawks general manager Stan Bowman as the GM and executive vice president of hockey operations. And the hockey world blew up over this one. An extremely controversial hire. Stan Bowman becomes the first former Chicago Blackhawks executive rehired by an NHL team since the team's 2010 sexual assault scandal came to light 3 years ago. Bowman resigned from Chicago after the independent investigation found that the organization mishandled the allegations by former player Kyle Beach that he was sexually assaulted by video coach Brad Aldridge. The NHL just reinstated Bowman, Al McIsaac, who was another one of the front office guys, and Joel Quenneville. That was earlier this month. Edmonton now becoming a bit of a villain on this front after signing Corey Perry now twice. They signed him once he was reinstated, and then they re-signed him during free agency here. They now hire Stan Bowman, and a great hire if you think statistically. Bowman, who led the Blackhawks to 3 Stanley Cup championships in 2010, 13, and 15. The league statement saying, quote, he has acknowledged what happened and used the time away from the game to engage in activities which not only demonstrate sincere remorse for what happened, but also evidence greater awareness of the responsibilities that all NHL personnel have, particularly personnel who are in positions of leadership. Kyle Beach has also said that he endorses the steps that Bowman and the other 3 that were reinstated have gone through to get to this point, but an extremely controversial hire, as Bowman will now be the front runner for the Edmonton Oilers.
Yeah. I kind of went back and forth. I was actually talking with Erin, my wife, about this, and I'm like, how can I tactfully say what I really want to say? And it just boils down to this. First and foremost, shame on the Blackhawks the moment it happened, because even if you're not a parent, right, which I am, I'm a father to a grade 5-year-old, even if you're not a parent, right, when you see someone in a position that's taken advantage of and everything else, it should trigger alarm bells. You shouldn't say, you know what, Quenneville's going to need Aldridge to drop some video during this playoffs, so I'm not going to really do anything about that. Aldridge will just continue doing his thing and whatever else, right? So shame on the Blackhawks, shame on the NHL, and shame on the Edmonton Oilers. Like you mentioned, they're becoming the villains in this story. The 3 of them should have been outright fired immediately by the Blackhawks as soon as something came up, as soon as Beach approached anybody else outside of those top three people. And honestly, for me, it feels like the NHL is just completely dismissing the gravity of the situation. And I understand that Beach has said, you know, I'm okay with it. You know, he's done what I feel like he needs to do. But you got to look at it from kind of this perspective as well. That's part of Kyle Beach's healing process, to forgive. That's part of his healing process. Okay. For me, I personally don't think that the three of them should be in charge of any type of organized anything anymore. That's just me personally. You know, again, yes, Kyle Beach said that I'm fine with it, but again, it's part of his healing process. You know, and good for him, you know, for seeking the help and everything else, and identifying that is part of his healing process, to say, okay, I'm going to maybe not forgive, but acknowledge that, you know, Bowman went through this, whatever process he went through, whatever program the NHL sent him off to, and did it. But not a fan of this at all. And I think the NHL mishandled it. And I think the Blackhawks mishandled it. And certainly now the Edmonton Oilers.
You know, I'm a firm believer on second chances. And for these guys, they, you know, whatever they process they went through, and it's been well documented by a couple of sexual assault survivors that, you know, multiple people within the hockey community have backed these guys after, you know, the atrocities that were committed within the Blackhawks. On the human element, there's the second chance there, and it's a very sticky situation. But now you know, especially in Edmonton here, Corey Perry, now Bowman, what precedent does that set as we look at another case from this year? You have, was it five or seven players that are, you know, are currently suspended after the terrible things that happened with Hockey Canada, and we could see those guys right back in jerseys from what it seems like right now, and there's no set punishment unless there's criminal charges, unfortunately.
Well, that's part of my issue, right? That's part of the issue. The fact of, you know, the larger issue of SA in hockey in North America, not just in the US, but Hockey Canada, right? The fact that those teams knew that those 5 to 7 players were going to get brought forth to that court in Ontario and go up and face those charges. And they didn't even, it wasn't even an afterthought. It was like, oh, they're on personal leave. We're still paying them, but they're on personal leave. And like they were paid up until the point where they were like, okay, we're charging them and bringing them to court. Okay, we're cutting them. That's it. We're done. Like, I understand you got to be charged with something and whatever else, but, you know, in a situation like this, right, you have to think, and this is not me just being a father, you have to think of the kind of example you're setting for everybody else around the world, right? Like, who wants to be a hockey fan of the Edmonton Oilers? If you're a casual fan, forget it. Like, if you know any part of the story, which is a pretty prevalent NHL story, if you're a casual fan, you know, like, I'm not watching an Edmonton Oilers game. Get out of here with that. Now if they were to make the playoffs next season, now you're watching that game and hoping that whomever's on the other side of the ice is going to pummel them and eliminate them early, right? So maybe it does one of two things for the NHL. Maybe it's like, now they have a villain, but now Edmonton's playing. I got to watch this game. I got to see what's happening against Edmonton. Is anybody going to go after Corey Perry? Are the bad guys going to lose? Now you're going to get all these ratings from all these games. Don't be surprised if TNT throws on a bunch of Edmonton games for their 10 o'clock time slot.
And one of the major complaints around Stan Bowman as a general manager was that he capsized Chicago. A lot of people say he stepped into the success there. How about the situation he's stepping into in Edmonton? And it's going to be this topic is going to be right back at it when Edmonton lifts the cup next year. That's my firm pick. And the number one offseason, undoubtedly, maybe under Nashville, but from the team they already had, the runner-up in the Stanley Cup, to the names they added, and Stan Bowman now gets to stand on top after doing absolutely nothing. And whoop, that's all my work. And he might be a 4-time Stanley Cup champion thanks to that.
So that's crazy. You mentioned it. I think it was you said Nashville on top. I think it was a 1A, 1B situation, right? There was no clear winner. Both teams really won free agency, hands down. Those two teams did what they had to do to improve their team. And, I'm with you despite everything that's happening right now. Edmonton is my favorite for next year based on things that are happening. But if there's one team that I hope that could bounce them, it could be maybe Nashville or maybe even Dallas if they go back up against them again. But, as you mentioned, just fall into that job and then become a 4-time Stanley Cup champion winner. Wow, what a life.
I'll end it on a positive note here and a bit of a sad note at the same time, but props to Joe Pavelski officially announcing his retirement after the somewhat question marks. He said it was most likely the end after the Dallas Stars were eliminated. Now it is officially the end of his career, and Joe Pavelski, an all-time leader. Will he be a Hall of Famer? That's up for question marks, but he is number one in most playoff games played without a Stanley Cup in NHL history. 199 playoff games for Pavelski, the third most games played among any player in NHL history. 1324, the final number there. Pavelski hangs up the skates here, in an outstanding career for him to look back on now. Unfortunately for Wyatt Johnson, he just lost his ride to the rink. But great props to Pavelski, George, as he ends it here.
Yeah, and all intents and purposes, Casey, all those numbers are great, but more importantly, I think every story that's come out about Joe Pavelski has been something like taking a player like Wyatt Johnson under his wing, taking him to the rink every day, show him the ropes of the NHL in his community, whether it was in San Jose or Dallas, just giving back to the community. And I think that's the bigger picture, right? Like, he's not only was he a great hockey player that deserved better, part of the reason why I was rooting for Dallas to go up against New York in the Stanley Cup final to come out of the West. But, just a great guy with a very, very good NHL career. I'm with you. I think is whether or not he makes a Hall of Fame is maybe 50-50, depending on, who's voting when, so to speak. But, a great career and a great person and a great teammate from all the stories that we've heard and are able to read, online.
As the show drops, we're a week into August here. The Olympics just about concluding. Have you been watching much of that?
Yes. I do some swimming and diving broadcasting in the winter as well. So I've been glued to the swimming. My daughter's in gymnastics, so of course we've been watching Simone Biles and Suni Lee kind of do their thing in gymnastics. But it's been fantastic, and of course one of my favorite bands opening the ceremonies in Gojira. So that was an interesting opening ceremony.
We're about 2 weeks away from NCAA volleyball season here, so I've definitely been watching quite a bit of the beach, which I think is by far my favorite Olympic sport. The athleticism in beach volleyball is unbelievable, and you don't realize that until you try to go play beach volleyball, and you realize how limited your vertical is. And it's been a pleasure to watch that, and Snoop Dogg's analysis. I'm lighting him up on Twitter here, trying to get him into the booth for a Clarkson game. I think he might be a rising star in the broadcast booth. But we're counting down until NCAA sports are back here. George, what's the rest of August got planned for you?
11 days off officially. I'm looking at the calendar. August 4th, August 15th, I have my first go round women's soccer. So not too much time before I got to deep dive right in. You mentioned volleyball. I got some volleyball in my schedule as well, but probably like 30 or 32 games through October 31st, and that's not including hockey. So it's exciting.
Hockey's coming right up as well. I got my calendar marked for the 27th is opening night for us, but we'll be back plenty of times before that here on the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. One more show coming up in August before we're on to the weekly schedule through September, and then once the NHL season faces off, we'll be twice a week and ramping up for a lot of exciting news, guests, and more coming up here. The next episode, we're going to have a little bit of fun here in a fantasy episode as we'll be breaking down each of our top ranked salary cap compliant rosters, as those on the show are going to each submit a roster that goes to the salary cap, and we'll see who agrees and who disagrees on that. We're also going to go through our rankings of the top to bottom 32 jerseys, as Matt brought that one up, crapping on the jersey behind me here. And we'll see where the Anaheim Ducks new jersey lands them. Stay tuned in about 2 weeks from now. And until then, hopefully enjoy plenty of the Olympics. George, thanks for hopping on. It's been a pleasure as always, and looking forward to chatting real soon here. Good luck with your off days, and the broadcast schedule is going to be filling up pretty quick.
Oh yeah. Always a pleasure, Casey, to jump on and talk hockey and other sports with you, and looking forward to coming back. And once we get the show really rolling to twice a week, get back into it and get into that grind, baby.
That's it. 6 down. And next up is lucky number 7. This has been another episode of the Fifth Liners Podcast. Until next time, have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.